So we're going to start with an update on the EDR profile. Thank you, welcome. And then we are going to drop into ESO service observations, and that will take us through to the lunch break. And we'll play it by ear as to when we want to get coffee and what have you. I don't quite know what you've got in mind.
I have biscuits today.
You've got biscuits. Okay, so we have sugar in the room. If you don't have sugar at home, then it looks like that might be necessary. So, without further ado, as we like to say, let's get on.
Then I think Håvard should present something regarding the EDR profile work that we have done in Rodeo. It should be that it's here. Again. Yeah.
Just before we get going, there was a comment in the chat saying can't access the recordings from yesterday, and that's true because the recordings right now are on FMI's SharePoint tenancy, as it's called. But we will be publishing the recordings after the meeting, so that people can get them. We'll also edit out all of the rubbish as best we can. So you'll hear less of me talking.
Should I stand here or something?
Anywhere you like.
Yeah.
The microphone is there, so
you could sit, and I think you choose.
But do people hear?
And the camera is there.
Okay, so they don't see me anyway.
No.
Okay.
So then you should sit here. But they see me. But
okay. Yes. So this, my name is Håvard. I work at EUMETNET Norway. In the IT department, I work with lots of open data and things like that. I was involved in Rodeo early in the design phase, but not since, except for kind of halfway through, I guess, the Rodeo project about, I don't know, a year ago, something like that. It was decided that, okay, we need to do some work to make sure that interoperability of when using EDR worked in Rodeo. So that was kind of the start of this effort that I'm leading to build an EDR profile for the Rodeo software. This is I had this presentation. Mikko built it first for Rome, a meeting for OGC for Rome, and then I adapted it to the OGC meeting in Mexico last week. So I'm just reusing the name if it's confusing. Okay, so there's been, I'm going to skip this Rodeo stuff. So the goal of the profile is to make it create constraints. Should I explain EDR? Is that everyone knows EDR, or should I? Should I go through EDR?
Really briefly.
Okay.
I think a lot of people know, but just you know, 2 minutes on where it came from.
Yeah. So it's not totally yes. Okay. So, yes. Okay. So before start with the profile, so OGC is a standard build standard for geospatial services and data formats, and they've had for a long time these standards for web services, VMS, features, CSW, and so on for metadata and data. And they now replace all these standards with a new suite of APIs. It's like OGC API, and then you have different specific APIs for different purposes. So you have this common API, which is rules for shared between all APIs, and then specific APIs for maps, tiling, metadata, and also important for today, EDR, which stands for Environmental Data Retrieval. And basically, it was built to be able to query large multidimensional data sets, like instead of downloading a NetCDF, you could add that type of data set through a web service and then query it and get exactly what you want and just download that. Okay, and this previously in the Inspire directive, the old suite of services were very detailed specified. And I think they wanted to avoid being over-specifying the standard. So the current suite is open to, can do a lot of, cover more use cases and much more open to local adjustments, but also it's then ends up being like you can build, implement a service in many different ways. And that creates a problem for us because the rodeo services and the services used in something like GeoWeb needs to be so concrete that one client can be built and consume all these different services without having to add custom code for each specific service. And that is kind of the goal of this profile. I'm not sure if that is the definition of OGC, or I'm sure it's not, but that was at least my goal when I was doing this work. So to add extra constraints to the EDR standard so that everyone can build EDR services in the meteorological space and have a client just easily consume and join the different data from the different services. Okay, so to illustrate the problem, we have a few slides here. So in GeoWeb, for example, if you consume and create a graph from different services, you can get this double units thing where it's actually the same data type and the same unit, but they have in the service, they're just named differently, and then they show up as multiple axes. And similarly for parameters, if you have two services with the same parameter but named differently, they will show up differently, and it creates noise, but also confusion because then you're not exactly sure, are they exactly the same, or is it their differences in aggregation or something else? Yes, so these are a couple of examples of the problems you want to solve with the profile. So the profile is based on this EDR version 1.2, which is a version of EDR which is still in draft, but it has a lot of bug fixes and new features that solve some problems for us. So I think it's a good idea to target that. In addition, there's something called EDR Part 3, which is not so finished either. And this is the specification in OGC for how to add profiles to a service. So if you build a service, you have to do it following the specification. And the way they've done it is that you say which service you want, which standards you conform to, and the OGC is making a specific way to declare how you conform to a profile. Okay, so we build a core profile which all data types should conform to, and then specific rules for each data type. So we'll just go through a couple of examples. I will not go through all the requirements, and then people can just ask me questions. So for example, title, we want to use title for populating web UIs, and then we have constraints to make that work. And we want it to be easy to consume, having a minimum standard for all the spatial and temporal and vertical extents. You can have more, but there's kind of a minimum requirement. You have to add this OGC CRS 84 as the default for a projection. And also, we require you to license all open data as CC by 4. The idea is to have a few licenses, hopefully just one, but maybe we have to add more to be able to consume lots of data and without having to be worried about the legal consequences because you don't have an overview of all the licenses requirements in each of the collections. And then we have some requirements on parameters and units, basically using a vocabulary, and you have to use the terms in those vocabularies to describe the parameters. We also constrain the locations endpoints because you can describe different named locations, and today in the EDR spec there's no mandatory requirement there, so everyone can describe it differently, which causes problems when you want to populate a web UI and use the use this endpoint to get data. So this was the core part, and then we have different requirements for observations, which is relevant for ISO and other services which want to implement an EDR service to distribute similar data, like in situ observation data, like I guess also the climate work package would be, hopefully we won't have to have separate rules for the climate and observations data types. Most of these rules here was, I think, suggested by ISO itself. They wanted to solve the problem of giving all the detailed metadata that you have about how each observations are measured, but at the same time be able to standardize and make it easy to use the data, which is kind of an impossible task. But this is what we ended up with, is kind of a middle ground to try to cater to both use cases. So in order to do that, we kind of have to extend the standard a bit. I don't have to go into details, but people can ask me if you want to do it, which is, yeah. Also, I can say that in the core part, we have no rules about the response format. So all the rules about the structure of how to return the data is in the class for each data type. That's the idea, because there will be, the core part will use by so many different domains, and different domains have already requirements about the standards. Like if this is going to be used by aviation, they already have this XML format for you have to return. So it was kind of hard to create specific rules for the response formats. But in the in situ profile, there is a requirement to use coverage JSON, and also some rules about how to use coverage JSON. Also, for in situ, we also require to cover three locations, radius, and area data queries. In the EDR, there is no requirement to support any of the data queries. And the data queries are specific ways to access and filter the data. So ask for a point, or ask for an area, or a corridor, and things like that. So for the in situ data, you have to have locations, radius, and area, which was surprisingly controversial discussion, because you have this position query, which is kind of seen as the default, but it's a bit confusing to use position when you ask for observations data, because you're not exactly sure what's actually happening when you get a response. So in the end, we decided to make radius mandatory and position optional, but you can still have it. The last thing we've added is error handling. So, and it has a couple of, and this can cause some problems. So it's good to know. It uses a non-standard, or it's a standard, but it's not used a lot. This 204 status code. So if you ask for data within the extent, but actually you get no data back because you have asked for an area within the extent which simply doesn't have that area, which happens if you have a sparse data set rather than a dense data set. You will have to return a 204 as opposed to 200 with an empty content, or a 404 or something. So 204 with no content, that is the correct way. So you can signal to the client, okay, there's nothing wrong with your request, there's just no data. The reason we did this, I mean, it makes sense to have a specific handling of this, but also it seems like the OGC is already moving in that direction because they've had this discussion previously for other APIs. So we're just trying to, I'm guessing they will standardize on this at some point. But I think it seems to be the right, going in that direction. And we also want to use this, there's this RFC standard for how to use JSON to describe an error. And it's quite nice, actually, and we want to standardize on that. So every API, if they respond with an error using this JSON, you can, in a web UI, much easier use the error information because it's the same JSON response from every API. For 500 server errors, we have no requirement because usually you get those from caches and proxies and not just from the service. So it's kind of impossible to have full control over those anyway. A big thing that's missing is multilingual support from EDR. It's there in coverage JSON, but missing from the EDR. And there was a big discussion also, or a discussion in the last OGC meeting. I think they want to solve it. But it's kind of an open question if you solve it the same way as you do with coverage JSON, or if you solve it with just using HTTP standard mechanisms like this, just do content negotiation. Basically, you ask for language and you then have to ask twice. But that causes a big problem. If you ask for lots of data and then you have to ask twice to get it in both languages, then it's very inefficient. Rather than getting the once and get back a response into and you have metadata into languages. And I think OGC is going to work on it because, and they want to solve it in a way that's shared among all the API standards. So if we have opinions, also, I don't know if Jeremy, if you have opinions about this, it would be a good to weigh in with OGC about how to solve it, because it can cause problems if they go in a different direction that we don't want. So it seemed to me like Chris and the other guys in the Clyde Eastmet Ocean OGC group, they wanted to lift it up to through all the OGC. So this might become a shared thing for all the OGC. Yeah, how to handle this. Yeah.
Yeah, the big challenge in OGC is that there are several API groups going broadly in the same direction,
yeah,
and they're at different stages in the journey. Yeah. So, for example, with EDR Hub Sub, we were kind of first. And that will become more generalized, an official open standard in OGC, and we need to make sure it stays compatible with what we've done so far.
Exactly.
You know,
so it's building a bridge from two sides to this. Yeah.
And sometimes we want to make we want to make sure they meet in the middle.
Yeah.
Right. But yes, we can continue to try and nudge these things in a direction that suits our community. What I will say is that. In all the years I've been doing standards, working code kicks ass. If you can prove the stuff works and multiple people have implemented it, then that is generally a really good basis for standardization. Yeah. Talk is cheap, right?
And also standards is pretty cheap if it doesn't really get implemented
So the work that we do in our community here in MeteoGate, I think is hugely important because we're demonstrating, we're solving a problem for ourselves, right? And so the stuff that you were saying yesterday, it doesn't hydrology stuff. Well, let's bring that in, let's solve the problem. And then we kind of set the pattern for how everybody else's stuff works. It's great to be in the driving seat. It does require a little bit more thinking though.
Yeah. And I mean, versioning also becomes, because if you move first, then you almost certainly have to go back and fix things and create a new version. So yeah, so there's no thing about versions in the profile really, but we really need to deal with versions, I think. Yeah. Okay, so that's it. Next steps is to rename the profile from Rodeo to MeteOcean, which is an agreed name for the profile. So it will be like MeteOcean EDR Profile. And you also have built some tools, because I also think that's, as Jeremy said, code kicks ass, but also tools does the same. So if you have good tools to make it easy to build stuff, then it's much more fun to be to make something that's compliant. And actually, ECMWF wants to also be compliant with EDR, and they want to use this validation tool that we've built, because they seems like a good way to go.
Yeah, that's all built on the back of their Polytape service.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, they want to add a new kind of API interface to the same service, and it should be pretty straightforward, because they anyway have similar features.
I think that's been completed. They put PyGeo API front end on the top end of Polytape.
Yeah, and Tom has been super helpful in his work with this profile. So,
Yeah.
and he's building PyGeo API. So hopefully he will help in making sure that, I don't know how we will do it, but that the PyGeo API at least will.
Yeah.
Good. So I will rename the profile to MeteOcean and also move this validation tool to the EUMETNET organization, so it becomes more like an official validation tool which sits beside the profile. That's the idea. And after that, I think the profile is more or less finished, or not finished, but I don't think we'll do much more work to add more requirements if there is not any strong feedback.
Just some question. This validation tool that you're showing here is completely unrelated to what we used yesterday, right? For validating our.
I wasn't here yesterday, but did you use?
Sorry.
It's not the same
No, it's
validation. So this
it's
is
pretty much supposed to be doing the same thing.
This validation tool is you wrote it, so okay, the idea is to run it as a command line tool or as a through Docker, and you point to your API, and it goes through your Open API specification, and in addition it goes to your collection and does queries and checks that it conforms to the requirements, and if it doesn't, it will fail and point you to the URL where the rule that you have broken it exists.
If I can continue, so yesterday we used validation tool for these two metadata records.
Right, okay.
So these are two different things. That was the global discovery metadata records that we did yesterday and validated. But this tool validates the EDR API itself, so that it is according to EDR and especially this profile. So those two tools validate different things.
Okay.
And it's also kind of useful in general, because it also goes through your entire Open API spec, so it will find other things as well, not just EDR profile things. And after that, we will have to have a process for creating a first version. So also I would need feedback on this. So Jeremy, it would be good to have a discussion, because there needs to be some kind of review process for this profile to end it and make it a version and connect it with the things that happened in OGC with the part 3 and version 1.2. So I'm not sure exactly how to do it, but so I need kind of help to get a review process and get everyone, okay, this is now minted as the first version.
Okay.
So yes, yeah.
Whilst everybody else is busy doing hands-on stuff, we can have a chat about that.
Yeah. So yeah, good.
And maybe also mention that in here you mentioned that we have the in-situ profile, but the other parts are still.
Yes.
And now there has been also need for aviation regarding the swim services that must start in the beginning of next year. So there's a lot of confusion how to do things, including the EDR. So there's a need for aviation profile as well.
Yeah, and I think we should do it, but we have to then figure out how this will live when Rodeo project ends. how it should be maintained, because it needs to be maintained. It needs to be people, and you still have a Slack channel, or at least answer issues in the GitHub repo or something. So we need to figure that out, because I think it will be continuous need. I think to support this profile, and the validation tool. And I agree, it would be good to I think, at least for aviation and forecast, there's been a lot of wishes to have get a profile for those data types.
And also like a vertical profile type of things which we are now implementing in GeoWeb, so there's a lot of things.
Yeah.
Agreed, but they're not written down to the profile. So this has already grown a little bit bigger than the Rodeo, so we need to detach this from the Rodeo project and decide how to continue with this when the project ends.
And ensembles, how to do it with ensembles seems like a big deal. And also to conclude that I think OGC, and at least the MetOcean group in OGC, is interested in making this a global thing. So if this works and the profile makes sense, they want to kind of, I guess at some point it should be raised up to, and maybe be maintained by OGC or VMO or something, I don't know, but that remains to be seen. My intention, what I think is that we should at least keep this within EUMETNET and make it work for Europe first, and then maybe in a year or two, if this turns out to work well, then we could discuss with OGC to kind of let them take over, or I don't know. Yeah.
The bigger the group that own it, the more it will stick. But the more challenging it is to push it in.
Exactly. Yeah. So I want to keep it within this community first, and then maybe. But that's part of the. We need to figure it out. Okay. That's it. Thank you. Hopefully it was understandable, and if there's any questions.
I have a question on behalf of the warnings API, but so they have built an EDR API for warnings, but there's been some comments from us on if this is using the EDR API type or profile. Could I use the core profile and add on?
Yes,
additional.
Yes, I think there's two. First, we had a meeting with them, and I just asked them if they want to join.
I think sitting
yes,
there.
Yes,
so.
yes. So, yes, good. So I asked you, but I don't think you have shown up in the meetings yet.
Yeah, no.
I haven't invited you. I think I invited you to the meetings. If not, that was a mistake. I didn't do it.
Okay.
Because I thought I invited you to the weekly meetings, and then but if I didn't, then I'm very sorry, because then it was a mistake. I will be happy to include the profile. The challenge is that warnings are so different from these other, so I'm just not sure if it will work, but we could try. Yeah. So because all the other data types is more similar rather than warnings, because it's So that's the challenge.
What would be the alternative in this case if it doesn't? We just use some core.
It will live as a kind of a separate thing without any profile, just the regular EDR, and then the Open API specification that you produce will be kind of the ad hoc standard of how to do this by default, which is.
But I guess it could comply with the common path.
Yeah, if that works, if that would be the best to say that.
I don't see why it wouldn't, but
we try to follow most of these things you mentioned in the presentation.
Yeah.
The coverage JSON doesn't really make sense in our case, so we use GeoJSON.
Yeah, but in the coverage JSON requirements is not in the core, right? So there should be no response format requirements in core. It's only about the metadata and how you structure the kind of. Yeah.
And we have location queries, for example, but we don't have radius and area.
That there's no requirements for. This is also for in situ. So
okay.
And also we have no parameters parameters, so to speak, because it's just a cap format.
Yeah, right. So it
There-
has no parameters.
So you could see it as an opaque thing, or there are plenty of parameters, but I don't think that's what's meant here, because you cannot filter by all of them, and they're also not numbers. So there's textual information.
Yeah.
So,
And
There's a similar thing in ABS as well. You could request IVX exam. For example, there's no parameters, there's only the IVX exam. So I think in that case that they just use some parameters.
But
we also have no units.
yeah, but it doesn't require you to have units and parameters. It only says that if you have parameters and units, you have to follow the standard. So if are no parameters and units, then I think it's good.
So in that sense, we have kind of difficulty understanding what, because a profile means you define something extra. But
Yeah, it's
we
extra.
don't even have the basic stuff, so to speak. Or,
Yeah, that's
maybe that's a profile, can be considered a profile.
yeah. I mean,
define that.
as I said, the goal of the profile is to make it so that you could have one client, right, and consume data from different.
But exactly that is not possible in our case. I think because you cannot draw it on a graph, or it's hard to visualize.
I mean, you can visualize it like I mean, MeteoAlarm is a way to consume.
Yeah, but doing this kind of automatically just based on the profile.
It's difficult. That's the
It's
idea of the
difficult.
profile.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the point of the profile. To have GeoWeb is a good example, right? We consume directly. You don't have an aggregation service. We take data sets and then normalize them. You have many different data services, which all you can consume directly in a web UI and use the profile to make everyone conform to standard. So we can have one client, right? That's the idea. But
I think regarding the warnings, based on my experience in GeoWeb, there's some things that could be considered in the API. So I think it would be useful if we can have like a profile meeting dedicated to the warnings.
Yeah.
We can show us, so we can discuss this in more detail.
But another option would then be to just have something separate. If you want standardization, but don't record this doesn't work, you could have something separate. Like it's not MetOcean EDR profile, it's warnings EDR profile. So completely separate, but still which only deals with the issues. I don't know, that might be an option as well, but then that means kind of starting from scratch.
I think there's still quite a lot of common parts. So
Yeah, the interesting thing is that the CAP format itself is already a standard, and what we or MeteoGate does with the CAP standard is CAP standard is kind of standardizing the values in that CAP file.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
every institute is sending the same values, etc. So
but
building on top of this, an EDR API, kind of, or an EDR standard,
we need to
which
check with the people online.
kind of strange. Or
regarding CAP, it wouldn't be strange because I mean,
I think there are two different things.
They're not measuring anything, right?
yeah, but I mean,
So there's no
say.
parameters for them.
I mean, we have to discuss this in a separate meeting, I agree. But for example, with CAP as a response format for describing warnings, it's just the same as with coverage JSON, right? So in the core part, it says no requirements for response format, but in the C2, it says you have to use coverage JSON.
So there are two different things. EDR is about how to ask for data. And then you can have one or multiple formats that you get as a response.
Yeah.
In the EC2 case, it's coverage JSON. In your case, it's CAP.
So in a sense, like EDR replaces the RSS feed, not the CAP. So instead of just having an RSS feed to list the warnings, you have still, I'm sure, the feed, but also this EDR metadata. But the CAP stuff will be the same regardless.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we will take this discussion outside, and it's an important topic to handle. It would be nice if some of it could be part of the profile, and some of the profile could be used if we have the use case. Is there any other questions from the audience? Peter?
I noticed the what's it called? Observations MeteoGate EU. That's supposed to use profile.
Yeah, that's the ISO.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I guess it doesn't yet, right?
I think the
At least I tried to run it, it doesn't specify using
Observations, it's, I think Ahmed, he's not here.
he's coming.
He said it was merged, but I'm guessing it's not deployed. So the compliance with the profile is coded up and I think merged into the repo, but as far as I can tell, it's still not deployed.
Okay. The conformance section doesn't say that. Does it?
I think they implemented it 2 weeks ago, and the new version hasn't been rolled out yet. So, yeah. So I will come back to that in the next presentation. But at the moment, DVD is running the operational part of ISO. So our observations to mitigate while we roll out the latest versions. So if they haven't done that in DVD yet, then it's not conforming, I guess.
And the climate APIs, they're also supposed to conform to the qualifier.
Yeah, they should also use this profile and also the radar.
CTO observation, the core, right? Probably in city last time. What? Probably also it's okay.
Yep. Did we get an answer to my? But
Any more questions?
is it possible to? I can't see the answer.
So.
Okay. Yeah, I think the problems will be for the internal discussions, but when having a presentation, it's easier to follow what's been said. Are we done with the EDR profile?
So if you have any more questions, just you can talk to me, or someone can point to me my email address or something. There's a Slack channel called Profiles on the regular Slack.
I don't think all people here have access to that.
Otherwise, also, I'm not sure what's the best way for everyone to easily get in touch with this thing. Then, is there some kind of? Will there be some kind of web page for contacting when rodeo is over? I mean, an easy way to find stuff.
We will have some technical contact information.
Okay.
On the pictures.
Do
we have a plan for that, Jeremy? Regarding the contact information to the subgroups, and so we have that for each of the APIs. We have contacts in the metadata that will be contact points to administrative and technical aspects.
Yeah, because people will forget my email address or in the GitHub repo. So if you want to have questions about the profile, where should I resolve?
We can share your email address with all the participants afterwards.
Yeah.
Or now.
Yeah. And I think it's natural to have this information about the EDR profile in this portal.
Yeah.
But still, if you put your email address in the presentation, and then we'll share your presentation.
Or you can add it in the chat.
No. And
and add
many things.
And or.
Good points. I'll do that.
To answer your question, there is going to be a website, MeteoGate website, and will be contacted as well, both for data publishers and for users as well. Users how they access the data.
It will be the same webpage that I showed yesterday. So MeteoGate.eu.